A Deadly Web by Kay Hooper, a Bishop Files novel, which is not to be confused with an SCU, a Kay Hooper book. Anyway, it starts with a report from the Bishop Files, dated March 12th. To whom it may concern, my understanding of the situation involving psychics has increased substantially since my last report, even though I still do not have proof that would stand up in court. As I last reported, I know psychics are being taken, vanishing without witnesses, while others at least appear to have died in accidents that left bodies all but destroyed. I suspect, but cannot prove, that at least some of these quote-unquote victims were in fact also abducted rather than murdered, the bodies left behind identified, also in quotes, by falsified dental records and planted DNA, in quotes, bodies, of course, implying that other innocent people are being deliberately murdered only to provide cover for what are true abductions. I suspect but cannot prove that these bodies are most often likely transients, people expected by local law enforcement to move on or disappear, with no family to know or care what happens to them, no one to file missing persons reports. However, I also believe at least some bodies of supposed psychics were not transients. There have been too many convenient and unsolved deaths along the way for me to believe anything else. That alone would most certainly be cause for grave concern above and beyond the disappearance of psychics. An enemy ruthless enough to murder innocents for no other reason than to have a convenient body is an enemy who will stop at nothing. An enemy who has far too great an access to medical and investigative documents and files, and quite likely has allies or confidential informants inside law enforcement, possibly even inside government. Aside from that elusive information, what both interests and troubles me is the fact that at least some psychics are simply abandoned, vanished without warning and without a trace. My only explanation for that is a growing understanding that until they are abducted, the psychics who merely disappear live very quiet and normal lives, attracting no attention to themselves, perhaps unwittingly making themselves targets, simply because their disappearances raise few, if any, alarms. When they disappear, it seems to be, or is reported by law enforcement to be, a local tragedy. Runaway teenagers, unhappy wives, men overwhelmed by family responsibilities, perhaps inexplicable, but attracting little if any attention even from a news-hungry media when so much of seemingly greater importance is happening all over the globe. Still, though I have learned more, the ultimate answer eludes me. I know some psychics are aware of a faceless enemy that they fear being taken or killed, but I also know they seldom trust and never trust lightly, which makes it all the more difficult to even locate them, far less protect them effectively. I know that throughout my years-long search for psychics suited for law enforcement work, I have met and spoken to some who have since vanished without a trace. I know there is some kind of organization or group of people fighting to help and protect psychics. They are nearly as secretive as their enemy, and with good cause. I have learned more about that group and have managed not only to make contact with at least one cell, that's in quotes, of their organization, but even, I believe, to at least begin to win their trust. I do have some resources they lack, and long experience in locating and contacting psychics. I have high value to them. How much remains to be seen. In this report, I offer the circumstances and results of my contact and interaction with the group, and of the events taking place at the time, events that, for our purposes, began in January of this year. Respectfully submitted, Noah Bishop, Unit Chief, Special Crimes Unit, FBI. Prologue. The roses will be beautiful this year. And he said to me, it was all my fault. That poor child always has bruises, and I just know what's really going on in that house. Should I get involved? No vacation this year. Lucky we don't have to sell the house. Should I call the cops again when I hear her scream? They didn't do a thing last time. Didn't even go inside the house. The carpet in the bedroom really should be replaced. How will I feel when she turns up dead or disappears? They're coming. How was I supposed to know he hated pets? What do I get for letting friends fix me up, damn it? Jesus, why don't people know how to drive? You know how your mother is, and what am I supposed to do? You put up with her. It's just for 2 lousy weeks. Yes, but the concert will be fun, you know that. No, my mom won't let me go. They're coming. The club sandwich looks good. Maybe I'll have the club sandwich. The lawyer said I had a case. I can't just stand by and pretend the bastards aren't walking all over me. They should serve wine with lunch. I don't have to drive after all. I'm so afraid he'll hit me again. I have the gun, but do I have the nerve to use it? I'm so afraid if I miss, he'll kill me. They're coming. She's cheating on me, damn it. I know she is. I don't know why they can't just trim the side of their head. It looks ridiculous like this. He'll never promote me, the son of a bitch. Millions in sales for his fucking company, and he still believes women should be fetching coffee when they aren't barefoot and pregnant. Coming. If I'm very, very quiet, if I don't make him mad, then maybe he won't hit me again. Maybe I don't need the gun. Maybe... Really gorgeous roses. If her dog shits in my yard one more time... Coming. Painting their house just shows how much mine needs it. If I'm a good girl, I try to be a good girl. There's just no money to buy a new car. We'll have to fix what we've got and live with it for a while. Here. What do you mean? I can't play baseball this season? Dad, and he's here. The blue dress, I think. You know, I look good in the blue dress. He's going to... Damn high heels. Kill you. Damn. Don't you, Tasha? Chapter 1. Her eyes snapped open and Tasha Solomon fought to control her breathing. Fought not to betray the dagger of icy fear slicing deeper than her marrow. The cacophony of voices in her head was instantly muted. Shut in a room in her mind, the door slammed close against them. She could still hear them, but only distant whispers now. Most were her neighbors, or at least from this general area. Not all of them here, but most nearby or passing by. Their homes or jobs all around this small local cafe. Their thoughts, the ordinary ones of ordinary lives. Observations, absent thoughts, pain, irritation, fretting, planning, worry, admiration, jealousy, envy, fear. Worry about some poor little girl being abused. Tasha wanted to home in on that worry, so she could find out which neighbor was hurting their kid. She'd damn well do something about that, and it wouldn't involve cops. And the abused wife, who is that? Living in her secret hell, probably behind a smile of normality, thinking of the gun she'd dared to buy, but probably lacked the will to use. Alone, so alone. Tasha wanted to help her too. But it was that other voice that kept her mental door firmly closed, at least for now, because she couldn't risk reaching out again, listening again, opening herself up like that again. That other voice, or maybe it was many voices, she could never tell for certain. Many voices speaking as one. That was how it felt, how it sounded in her mind. Many, many voices, certain, implacable. And when she tried to see them, shadows. Tasha always felt more than saw them, shadows, watching, listening, waiting, all around her, but not close enough to touch. Not yet, at least. But they had been getting closer, she knew that, biding their time, but creeping nearer, so they could watch her as they had watched for a time now. It was difficult to focus in such a public place as the cafe where she sat, especially filled with the lunchtime crowd. But she closed her eyes and tried. Opened that mental door cautiously just a bit, just far enough, she hoped. Still somewhat protected, but She tried to listen, see with senses other than her ears and eyes. Shadows. Dark, misshapen, slipping away when she tried to see them, vanishing like smoke through her fingers. The shadows were as elusive as they had been for more than a month now. Elusive, but always near, always watching. Even in broad daylight they watched her, followed her, and she couldn't tell from the faces around her as she moved through her days whether any belonged to the shadows. She didn't want to believe that anyone or anything watching her was so near, literal shadows on the edges of her life, but she didn't know. In a crowd, how could she tell? She couldn't. If Tasha had been a nervous sort of woman, she'd be in a straitjacket by now, or at least heavily medicated. As she would be if she had told anyone about the shadows. Because that was crazy, right? Being haunted by shadows she could see only in her mind. That was nuts. Virtually always feeling an almost primitive sense of danger. The inner urge to run or hide, but not alone. Every instinct compelled her to stay visible as much as possible, to avoid dark corners or quiet places where they could, kill her, hurt her, take her, change her life forever. Miss. Tasha blinked, brought herself back to the here and now. She looked up at the waitress, who was displaying slightly uneasy concern. Miss, are you okay? Forcing a smile, Tasha said, yeah, fine, thanks. Meditation. When it's crowded like this, I try to go somewhere else in my mind. The waitress's young face relaxed, and she even popped her gum, cheerful again. Oh, I see. I wish I could do that often. She glanced around and smiled wryly. Can I clear this away for you? Would you like coffee? Tasha glanced down at the plate before her, at the half of the turkey sandwich still untouched, and knew she wouldn't finish it. Yeah, thanks, to both. Would you like a box of the rest of the sandwich and the fries? She wouldn't eat it herself, Tasha knew, but there was a big dog in a fenced yard she always passed on her way home, and he always welcomed leftovers. Please. The waitress smiled brightly. Be right back. Tasha looked at the check lying on the table, grimaced, and dug in her purse for her billfold. She was taking up valuable table space with her lingering, and she could see that there were a few people waiting at the front with varying degrees of patience to be seated. She pulled out cash to cover the bill, plus a generous tip. Generous enough that the waitress would be happy to allow her to sit here a bit longer and enjoy her coffee. Not that she wouldn't enjoy it. There wasn't a lot she enjoyed these days, and that was something she resented, something that pissed her off. Because as much as the weird and mysterious shadows she sensed made her afraid, they also made her angry. She'd lived her whole life with the ability to pick up the thoughts of people around her, most people, and she learned to deal with that privately without becoming some kind of public freak. The trick was not talking about it at all to anyone. She didn't hang out a shingle and tell fortunes or claim to be some kind of mystic, bending over an outstretched palm, even as she listened with that odd extra sense to the thoughts of the person across from her. Well, she had once a charity fundraiser, and she'd volunteered to be the quote-unquote psychic. Yards of colorful silky material draped around herself, and fake gold bracelets jangling on her arms, and a crystal ball lit from below to look properly mysterious. Tasha had done that only once. It had been unexpectedly exhausting to sift through the chaos of impressions, to find mental truths and mine just enough nuggets to impress her clients without scaring the shit out of them. And even so, she knew at least a few people that had left her tent not a little spooked by her accuracy. She'd had to consciously dial that back, making use instead of vague impressions that led her to predict happy lives and prosperity and correct decisions made. That had been a year ago, and Tasha had no intention of doing anything like that again. Just that one innocent event had roused the uneasy suspicion of several people she knew, and it had taken all the casual amusement she'd been able to muster to convince them of what they wanted to believe anyway, that it had all been pretend, not real. Because it couldn't be real, of course. Nobody could do that sort of thing. The man in the black leather jacket stayed close, but took care not to allow himself to be seen. There would come a time for that, a moment now and then to be briefly visible, to allow her to catch only a glimpse of him slipping out of sight. They had learned the effectiveness of such glimpses and just how to build on them, just how to elicit the fear and even panic that served them so well. First, only a glimpse, barely noticed, easily dismissed. Nothing identifiable except that black leather jacket, a subliminal trigger of uneasiness for so many people in this culture, a hint of danger. Then a glimpse elsewhere, here and there along the regular routine, and so the almost wordless suspicion of being followed. A glimpse just before darkness, slipping away, too far to identify except by that jacket. A glimpse in the neighborhood, outside a store, a theater, a church, at the bank, the dry cleaners, the local coffee shop, a favorite restaurant. A lurking presence that could not be innocent and so had to be potentially dangerous. He was watching. Was he following? What did he want? A glimpse outside across the street, the automatic checking that doors and windows were safely locked for the night, interrupted by uneasiness. Locks checked again, security systems tested and set, because everyone knew stalkers weren't just after celebrities, not anymore. So possible. Maybe a faceless enemy. Somebody watching. Somebody waiting for a chance, the right moment in which to act. Maybe shattering the illusion of safety. They had learned well how to unsettle, to worry, to panic. People who panicked made things so much easier. People who panicked made mistakes. Grace Seymour woke to darkness, and for a long and panicked minute or two she thought she was blind, but then she realized she could see dim shapes around her. People moving, but with an eerie silence. She wanted to speak, to call out a question, demand someone tell her what the hell was going on, but for some reason she was unable to make a sound. Her memory was fuzzy. She thought she had been at home, taking advantage of the waning winter sunlight to do a little yard work. Not that she could do much except weed this time of year, but that was enough. That was necessary, and it kept her from thinking very much. Usually. Her second marriage had just crumbled around her, and Grace felt nothing but bitterness about that. It wasn't her fault, after all, that she'd been born with the family curse. She'd been raised to hide it naturally, since it totally creeped people out if she reached for a phone before it began to ring, or knew things about people she shouldn't have known. It wasn't her fault her abilities had grown stronger over the years, that they'd grown more and more difficult to hide. As for the two men she loved and married, she honestly couldn't decide if she was a bad judge of character, or if both husbands had simply been unable to live with a woman who too often knew exactly whom they'd had lunch with that day, or that they'd spent that lunch in a motel room. Grace pushed that out of her mind and tried to remember today. She'd been on her knees wrestling with a stubborn weed, and then nothing. A moment of icy coldness that had made her wonder idly if a rare winter storm was heading for Charleston, and then blackness. Now she was here, wherever here was, lying on something hard, in darkness, unable to speak, and, when she tried, unable to move. She was strapped down. Hard as she tried, no sound escaped her. Fear became terror, roiling around in her mind and body, leaving her even colder than she had been in this cold place. In desperation, she reached out with that other sense, that curse she'd been born with. Shadows, misshapen, distorted, blacker than black, sliding away when she tried to focus on them, uttering low sounds that made the hair rise on the nape of her neck in a primitive response. Bad, very bad, evil, not human, and they want me, no. Oh, please, no, don't make But she couldn't protest out loud, couldn't cry out against the prick of a needle that made the fear recede, made her feel as though she were floating on a peaceful sea. For a moment, and then she became aware that they were moving her body, spreading her legs, raising her knees. Oh God, no! Their hands on her were cold, so cold, and she could feel breathing, even colder than the touch, cold and reeking of something that smelled old, older than the earth, older than time. She wanted to cry out, to scream in protest, but she could make no sound. No sound when she felt them penetrating her body. No sound when she understood what it was they were doing to her. Grace Seymour could do nothing except lie naked and exposed on a cold table in a cold, dark room while the monsters changed her life forever. John Brody was always cautious. It was his nature as well as his job, but he was more cautious than usual about this particular meeting, because even the idea of it made him profoundly uneasy. There were so few in law enforcement they could trust, a precious few, as he had been reminded. He can't help us, John. From all accounts, he has his hands full with that unit of his. All the better for us. Despite their efforts to remain low-key in the public eye, the truth is that the Special Crimes Unit is the most safely visible group of psychics we know of, and they are within law enforcement. We haven't been able to find a reliable, trustworthy source inside law enforcement. To have someone like Bishop on our side can give us an enormous edge. I don't know about that, boss. We don't know who Duran has on his payroll. It seems every time we turn around we stumble over another dirty cop or fed working for his side. Brody found that knowledge very grim, and it showed. Granted, which makes it vital for us to have a well-placed source of our own, someone with high-level access to information and the authority to act with virtual autonomy, someone who knows the value of discretion, someone who knows about psychics and psychic abilities, quite likely more than we know. But aside from all that, just to have a unit chief inside the FBI, you know what that could be worth, potentially, John? He has as many political enemies as he does allies. Arguable, I suppose. Do we really want to catch the attention of either? I don't believe we will, not through Bishop. No one else on his team other than his wife knows about us. He says he doesn't plan on sharing with his team unless and until we okay it, and I believe him. Yeah, maybe. But isn't his team largely made up of telepaths? I'm guessing it's hard to keep a secret in that group. And even if he manages that, odds are that sooner or later one of his people is going to have a close encounter with either one of our psychics or else with somebody on the other side. And if he or she is as powerful as Bishop's people are supposed to be, then we've got even bigger trouble than we have now. She was thoughtful. Maybe not. The one thing most of Bishop's people have that ours tend to lack is consistent experience in using their abilities, and much stronger shielding to close out the minutiae of everyday life, the background chatter that tends to bombard most telepaths and clairvoyants. With only a few exceptions, our psychics are rarely able to shield effectively, and are understandably wary of exploring the limits of their abilities, and rightly so, since we know it draws all the wrong kind of attention to them. So, even those who use their abilities do so defensively, not as weapons or even tools. But Bishop's agents use their abilities to investigate as investigative tools, often openly and virtually always under the intense pressure of deadly conditions and under law enforcement and media scrutiny. Okay, but I don't see how that helps us. I don't know that it will, except in the sense of keeping them too well known to be considered viable targets. Having a team of powerful psychics beyond the reach of the other side could be an ace in our pocket, and maybe there's a lot we can learn from Bishop in the meantime. As a good faith gesture, he's provided us with an extensive file containing information on several of their more complex investigations. cases where psychic abilities made the difference between success and failure. Names redacted, I assume, Brody offered dryly. Of course, as well as some of the details on non-psychic aspects of the case, which is understandable given his position. I'd be less trusting if he seemed willing to share everything. True enough. Is any of the info helpful? Maybe. Some of his people have displayed some pretty remarkable abilities, which at the very least makes room for possibilities with their own psychics. Those willing might be able to learn how to make better use of their abilities and even shift the balance in the struggle. We have people going through the file. Well, let me know what they find. If there's anything useful to us, I, for one, really am getting tired of mostly fighting a holding action. In the meantime, what I want to know is how Bishop found out about us. None of us approached him, right? Certainly not officially, though as you said, it was bound to happen that he or one of his team would encounter one of us. That's what happened and why he asked for a meet. Who did he cross paths with? She smiled. Brody sighed. And you're not going to tell me. It isn't necessary for you to know, not just now. All you need to know is that he was already aware there was a situation, and that his awareness makes sense. He spent years searching for and tracking psychics for the SCU, and for that civilian investigative organization he co-founded, Haven. He's apparently crossed paths with a number of us at various times, and even interviewed a few psychics who weren't suitable for law enforcement work, but who later joined us. Since he's far from being stupid, he realized, a long time ago I think, that something was going on. He began to notice patterns, the same sort of patterns that alerted so many of us. Psychics he met there one day and gone the next. Too many convenient accidents involving psychics to be coincidence. Too many reported deaths with no bodies recovered or bodies too damaged to be identified by more than dental records or DNA, both of which we know the other side can and does plan or fake. The other side has taken extreme forensic countermeasures, including spreading out their activities so that no one law enforcement agency would be able to connect even two events, given differing jurisdictions and the reluctance of most agencies to share information. There's no notice on a national scale or by any federal organization, no awareness that something was happening until Bishop saw it. I'm surprised he didn't launch an investigation, Brody said. I'm not. He was building his unit and forging as many potentially useful connections as he could find, both inside the FBI, other areas of law enforcement, and in the private sector, all the while working to make sure psychic abilities as investigative tools would be taken seriously within the FBI and other law enforcement. Everything grounded and reasonable, not fanciful or outlandish. Abilities based at least on scientific possibilities, nothing mystical or magical. No mystery about it. Nothing that isn't entirely human and even remarkably commonplace. If he had gone out publicly or even within the FBI and declared there was a conspiracy to abduct or kill psychics, reasons unknown but mysterious, how long do you think he would have lasted, let alone his unit? True, Brody admitted grudgingly. He wouldn't have been taken seriously at all, and that had to be the last thing he wanted. Bad for his purposes and work, but best for ours. So it kept our problems on a par with Bigfoot and alien abductions, as far as the media is concerned. On the rare occasions when something is noticed, at best we're conspiracy nuts, and at worst deluded people imagining some faceless enemy around every corner. Not fun to be considered crazy, but we'd never be able to operate as quietly as we do otherwise. Well, I give Bishop credit not only for not only noticing, but finding the time and energy to put enough disparate pieces together to realize something was going on. Not his line, not serial killers or other murderous psychopaths, not crimes the FBI could or would legitimately investigate, but something involving psychics, and if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's that he knows and values psychics. True, he's one himself. A touch telepath, very powerful. He also has an ability to focus his normal senses in a hyper-acute way his team informally refers to as spider senses. Comic book terms? Well, informally, but it's something that allows him and some members of his team to see and hear things normally beyond the limits of those senses. Brody eyed her. He's seen them? I'm not sure it's that definite. All I can tell you is that he knows about the shadows, calls them that, a term he was not given by any of us, and says there's something he's never sensed even in the worst cases the SCU has investigated. Comforting, Brody said sardonically. I'm assuming he'd have to touch one to know for sure. I assume the same thing, though even if he did touch one of them, there's at least a 25 to 30% chance he wouldn't read anything from them, assuming they can be read. Bishop says his solid range tends to be about 75% of the people he meets, those he can read. Others are apparently not on his frequency. What happens if he touches somebody like me, somebody on our side without much of a shield who knows maybe too many of our secrets? Do I shake hands with the man and give up more information than I want? Brody, he's perfectly aware of his own abilities, and despite having his shields raised, which he promised to do, I'm betting he'll take care not to touch you at all. He wants to help and protect psychics, and that means he wants our trust. Being suddenly in possession of too many of our secrets without our permission wouldn't exactly be a good first step. Okay, but so far I'm not seeing much benefit for us in taking him into our confidence. John, he can get us access to the kind of information we could never get on our own, even with all the sources we do have, and he can do it quickly, without attracting official notice. If anyone can, it's Bishop, plus I'm betting he knows the whereabouts of a lot more psychics than we do, and the word I got was that he monitors those he's met, and a few he hasn't. He keeps eyes on them or has a different way to monitor them, but however he does it, he knows what's going on with them, maybe even in time to save some of them. And from a purely practical point of view, just because he knows they aren't suitable for the FBI or investigative work when he encounters them, doesn't mean he believes that's always going to be true, or isn't aware they might someday need his help or protection. After a moment, Brody shook his head. Mine not to reason why, I guess. You know better than that. And you also know that if you aren't convinced Bishop can be trusted and can help us, once you've met him, that's it. He won't be brought into any of the cells or used as a resource. But he'll still be aware of us, boss. We can't stop that. Also can't stop him trying to put the puzzle pieces together on his own, something I doubt very much we want to happen. She paused and added he kept an eye on the situation with Sarah and Tucker. In fact, I'm reasonably sure he was present more than once while they were trying to get to safety, remaining in the background observing unobtrusively. Brody opened his mouth and then closed it, frowning. She nodded. Yeah, there was no way he could step in to help, not when he wasn't sure what was going on. He likely would have made bad worse, and I give him credit for recognizing that. Okay, makes a certain amount of sense. Anything else you should know about him? He shares his wife's precognitive abilities, extremely powerful precognitive abilities. Brody frowned. Have they seen a future in this? If so, Bishop didn't say. Won't you ask him? Maybe I will, because if he has that answer, then he could be a lot more to us than merely another useful resource, another ace in the hole. He could be a game changer.